Hello aspirants, looking at current affairs for 7th December. The news items which we have picked up from the Hindu are these 10. We'll look at each of them in detail. The first one, Justice Jagdish Singh Kehar to be next Chief Justice of India. So the present CJI, Justice T.S. Thakur, will retire on 4th Jan 2017 and Justice Jagdish Singh Kehar will take over. So he is the senior most judge in the Supreme Court now. So that is the reason why he'll take over. So under the pattern for appointment of judges, the procedure as under the collegium system, what has been fixed now is that only the senior most judge of the Supreme Court takes over as the CJI. So there is no choice there. So his name has been recommended by the Supreme Court to the center. Though you know about the entire appointment controversy, appointment of judges of Supreme Court as well as High Court and transfer of judges too. So this is done through the collegium system, which is a self-evolved system of the Supreme Court. The government had passed the NJAC, National Judicial Appointments Commission Act, and also Constitutional Amendment Act, but this was rejected. This was called unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in a judgment by a 5-judge constitution bench in which Justice Jagdish Singh Kehar had also presided. So he was the presiding judge in this constitution bench. So the thing is that NJAC gave equal rights in appointments to both the judiciary and the government, and the judiciary said the prominence of the judiciary in appointments reduces, that will affect the independence of the judiciary. So on those grounds these were rejected, the amendment acts to the constitution and NJSC formation act. So now the thing is that retirement, so there is no term for the judges. There's no 5-year, 10-year term. It's only till they hold the post till the age of retirement, and the age of retirement of judges of the Supreme Court is 65 years. So Justice T.S. Thakur will complete his 65 years of age on 4th Jan, and then Justice Jagdish Singh Kehar will take over and will hold the post for 7 months till 27th August 2017, where he will achieve 65 years of age. So that's how the judges function and the appointments are made. Now the thing is that for High Court judges, the age of retirement is 62 years. So there are also recommendations to increase this age to 65 years to allow the judges to continue and to reduce the workload. So this is one way in which that can be done, increasing the tenure of the judges. So this recommendation has been put forth, but nothing has come on it. So till date, it is 62 years of age. Then on other judgments on which Justice Jagdish Singh Kehar had presided are mentioned, like the imposition of precedence rule in Arunachal Pradesh was rejected by the judiciary in Jan 2016. Then he was part of the bench in which Sahara chief Subrata Roy was jailed. Then he was part of the ruling in which equal pay for equal work principle was upheld for even casual workers, daily wage workers. So this was also there. Then he has also said that judiciary will work within its Lakshman Rekha. There will be no judicial overreach provided the executive and legislature follow constitutional norms and principles. So these were his points of views aired during the various benches on which he has presided. Next news is Army not awaited for NIA probe into Nagrota. So you know about the Nagrota camp on which the terrorists had attacked on 29th November, in which 7 soldiers including 2 officers lost their lives. So there is need for probe on this attack, and the army refuses or is reluctant to allow the NIA, National Investigation Agency, to undertake this investigation because it is the army in which the attack took place. So NIA, National Investigation Agency, was set up post the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, and it is responsible for investigating all terror related cases. So terror related cases take place as such, but then if it is an army attack, then army has its own procedures, norms, the way the army functions. So it cannot allow the civilian forces to come in and look into the army's functioning and procedures. So they are a little reluctant to open their doors. So army functions under Ministry of Defense and NIA functions under Home Ministry. So the army says we don't want Home Ministry's interference here. So they are a little reluctant. This has been seen earlier too. But even now the news is that NIA has been given the authority to initiate investigation in Nagrota camp. So that is there. So Then also another point which is put forth is these terrorists used the cover of elephant grass and entered the camp from the rear and undertook this attack. So how they entered from the rear using this elephant grass? What is this elephant grass? We'll see that too. So elephant grass are these huge grass which grow, and these are also beneficial. They are also called Napier grass or Ugandan grass. So they are tropical grass native to Africa, and it requires less water and nutrients. So it is used primarily for grazing as well, and it is used for pest management also. So the way it functions as a pest management is that it is a pull crop, means you grow your crop on the field and then along the perimeter, along the boundary, you grow this pull crop. So what happens is that the pests, like one example given is of stem borer moths. So these stem borer moths which attack these maize, destroy the maize crops, they get attracted to this Napier grass, elephant grass, and hence the maize crop is safeguarded. So this is another way of pest management which is used. So this is less costlier than chemical fertilizers and pesticides, insecticides being used, not fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides being used. So this is a pest management strategy in which it is used. Also it helps improving soil fertility, protects the arid land from soil erosion because it holds the soil together. So it has other benefits as well. It can help in wind breaking. So used in fire breaks also. It is used in paper pulp production. So all these are also its benefits. Then the next news item is INS Betwa will be made seaworthy, Navy. So this is INS Betwa, which is a 4,000 ton Brahmaputra class frigate. Frigate means warship. So this was undocked. While it was being undocked from the Mumbai Naval Dockyard, it resulted in an accident. It tilted over and it tilted down. So this is called keeling. So it keeled over, you can see, and this cannot be pulled up because we don't have that capacity cranes. So we are calling for international experts coming in to look into the matter and assist in this accident, post this accident recovery. So it will result in a damage to the warship also. So this INS Betwa has routine refitting which is done. So this was the purpose for which it was docked in Bombay Naval Yard, and during this docking, what happens is dock blocks are used. So it is brought out on the land surface, and these dock blocks act as a support on which it stands. So while undocking, there is a requirement to have sufficient flow of water coming in so that it can come in and make the ships flow and then sail into the sea. So it has to go beyond again to the seas. So during this process the accident took place and it keeled over. Also 2 sailors inside the ship also died. Many were injured too. So this accident needs a further probe also. And why this took place? Was it because of a person's of a worker's failure, or is it a technical failure which requires some looking into, that how these dock blocks failed? So we'll have to wait and watch if there's an inquiry set up and what are the results. But this is a major accident which has taken place, and earlier 2 such accidents have taken place. So we do need a thorough inquiry in this matter. You can see here the whole process is also shown. So it's a missile frigate. It carries guided missiles, and the sailors, there were 16 sailors on board, 14 were rescued, 2 died. See, this is the refitting. It needs refitting. So it's brought to the dry docks. So then the dry dock is first flooded with water so that the ship can sail in it. Then support beams are used on both sides to keep it upright. Then next stage is that the dock is drained out, so the ship settles on these blocks. Then after the refitting is done, the dry dock is again flooded. So when it was flooded, during this process the accident took place. So if 1 or 2 blocks move from their place or the support beams are compromised during any stage of this procedure, the ship's balance is affected and the ship can tip over. So this is the accident. Then the next news item is, so you can read this further too if you are interested. The next news item is no dividend waiver for railways this year. So railways has to pay a dividend to the center. dividend is on capital investment. So capital investment in the railways is done by the central government. So railways is the only ministry on which has a separate budget for itself. Also, this is going to end from 2017-18. So 2016-17 is the last financial year in which railways was presented as a separate budget. From next year onwards, it's only one single budget which will be presented. So now the thing is, from next year onwards, there will be no question of this dividend, because railways is not be treated as a separate entity and separate budgeted. But then this year they have to pay a dividend on the central government capital, and they are unable to pay this dividend because of poor finances, means it is a loss making entity. You can see the operation ratio. So this operating ratio is an indicator of railways finances, means how much it puts in and how much it gets out. So operating ratio is 113.71%, means for putting it at 113.71 rupees, say for example, it gets 100 rupees. So it's a loss making. You can see this around 14 rupees is the loss which it makes on every 100 rupees. So its target is to have an operating ratio of 92%, but that has not been achieved. So presently it is unable to pay this dividend. Also the entire dividend amount, 9,731 crore, will be not the amount to be paid. It will have to pay only 5,430 crore, because the remaining 4,300 crores, this will be deducted because this goes as subsidy by the central government. This is the loss making routes on which the railway spends. So this will be deducted, but remaining amount has to be paid. So the thing is that railways makes a loss because of its earnings which are budgeted and the amount of earnings which it gets. So passengers earnings have also fell, and freight earnings. Freight charges are charges when it uses goods trains, through cargo being, commodities being traded. So transported. So this is also there is a drop in this. So both have suffered, passenger and freight charges. Also freight charges in the railways is quite high. They also help in subsidizing passenger fares, because passengers fares are substantially low in railways. So we'll have to wait and watch what happens further. Also another point adding to the burden of the railways is the 7th Pay Commission's recommendations, in which government employees salaries had gone high. So railways has to pay those salaries too. So of course it will affect the profit making of the, or at least the budgeting of the railways. So this is also there. So we'll have to wait and watch what happens, because once the railway budget is integrated into the general budget, then how does the government go about it? How will the railways fare? Will it be made more efficient? Will it, the borrowings of the government it will depend on government's investments only, but then how will it fare in operating ratio perspective, and also how will the subsidization will put into effect? So we'll have to wait and watch for that. Next news item is Mongolia seeks support against China's blockade. So this is Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia. So Mongolia is claiming that China is imposing a blockade on it. So there is a very high tariff charges which are put on the Mongolian trucks passing through Chinese territory. So you can see Mongolia is a landlocked country. Majorly its two major neighbors are Russia and China. So it's sandwiched between them. Of course there is Central Asian access too. But then China is having a major trading partner with Mongolia, and it is charging very high. So it's becoming difficult for even essential commodities. It will become difficult for Mongolia to survive. Now why is China doing this? Because we have done this earlier in news too, that Dalai Lama, who has been given asylum by India, Dalai Lama from India, he visited Mongolia, and Mongolian government was at that point of time on Chinese protest, it said that it is only a visit by a religious leader for religious functions. He's not meeting the government. There's no government involvement in this. So they did not do anything, and as a response to this, now China is showing its weight. So this is what is going on, and Mongolia is asking India's support against this China's blockade. Of course, Russia has also opened its doors. The Russian transit rights are there presently. It's dependent on Russia only for transit. But then Russia, it's up north, so it's very difficult here. China is the main country through which it can go to South Asia, Southeast Asia. So Chinese transit route is very much essential. So we'll have to see what happens with this too. Even it is winter, so winter temperatures are already minus 20 degrees Celsius here. So transport obstructions by China further adding up to the human misery, and there's a humanitarian crisis looming in Mongolia is what Mongolia claims. Dalai Lama is the political and religious leader of Tibetans here in Tibet, and Tibet demanded independence. Now they have toned down and they're demanding autonomy within China, but China refuses to budge. It clamps down any uprising in Tibet with force. So Dalai Lama had come to India seeking asylum in 1959. He formed government in exile of Tibet from India. So this we know in 1959 this occurred, and 3 years later in 1962 we had the India-China war. So anyway, so this is one China policy. China believes that Tibet is part of China. There's another region too which China believes is part of China, which is Taiwan. So again on Taiwan too, President Trump, he received a telephone call and he had a telephone conversation with Taiwanese president. So this is also not liked by China because Taiwan is not considered as an independent country. It's one China policy which is put forth that Taiwan is also part of China. So where is Taiwan? You can see here. This is Taiwan, an island nation, not considered a nation. It's not member of United Nations too. Rather, it was Taiwan government which was member of United Nations, which it called China. So its official name is Republic of China. And proper this China is called People's Republic of China. So this is ROC, Republic of China, and this is PRC, People's Republic of China. So this is how it's also called Chinese Taipei, Taiwan. So it takes part in sports events as a team called Chinese Taipei. So it's considered part of China. This is China's policy, one China policy. And America also believes in this one China policy and it has adhered to it. Now President Trump becoming the president, now there is confusion about what will be America's policy on this matter. So China has protested against this, claiming that these will not be acceptable. So let's see, the President Trump says that it was just a courtesy call. He has not been appointed as the president. That will happen in Jan. He has been elected as the president, but he's not entered into office. He's not entered into the White House yet. So that's the case. We'll have to wait and watch what he does on this matter too. You should know about Taiwan's history too. This is going back to 1912 when the Qing dynasty in mainland China fell and Taiwan was under Japanese rule then. So this Republic of China was formed on the mainland whole of China in 1912. So this continued when Japanese surrendered in 1945 after the nuclear attack, bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Second World War came to an end. Japanese surrendered. This Republic of China, Taiwan also became free from Japanese rule. So Republic of China, the government on the mainland took control of Taiwan as well. So this was there. Then post this, Chinese Civil War started, and during this Chinese Civil War, the Republic of China lost control over the mainland to the communists. So communists came to power in China, and this Republic of China government fled to Taiwan and established themselves there as a government in exile. So this was in 1949. So it's claimed that it is the government for whole of China, including the mainland and this island Taiwan. But then this continued till 1991. Eventually it had to give up because China became more assertive. So Republic of China continued to represent China in the United Nations till 1971. Then finally it was People's Republic of China who assumed China's seat. So now Republic of China is not even a UN member. So this is the role reversal which took place. So it's the most populous non-UN state and the largest economy outside the UN. So this is about Taiwan. Then the next news item is, in a message to Trump, China defends Iran nuclear deal. So Donald Trump, while he was campaigning for the post of the president, for the election of the president, he had pledged that he would scrap the Iran nuclear deal. So Iran nuclear deal officially is known as Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So this is the deal. It's not a deal between USA and Iran. It's a deal between P5+1, means 5 permanent members of United Nations, China, France, USA, Russia, UK. And +1, P5+1 means Germany. Germany is the next nation which is added when you say P5+1. So it's a deal between P5+1, Iran and the European Union. So these are the members of under this JCPA, and Donald Trump alone cannot nullify this treaty is what China is saying right now, that China is standing with Iran and this nuclear deal cannot be nullified. So what were the provisions under this deal, you can see. So this is there. So Iran had undertaken a nuclear program and it wanted to expand. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, undertakes investigations, inspections on nuclear facilities. So all members of IAEA have to cooperate. So Iran had not disclosed locations of its nuclear sites, and all this can be known through surveillance by other nations through satellites. So the countries do come to know what nuclear activities are taking place. So USA had this suspicion. The other nations also believe that Iran is undertaking a nuclear weapon development program. So whatever Iran always claimed that its nuclear program is only for peaceful purposes, for reactors, nuclear reactors being established and for electricity generation. But then for that matter, what is the difference between a nuclear fuel being used for nuclear reactors and peaceful nuclear weapons formation or nuclear reactors is that enrichment of uranium. So if it is highly enriched uranium, it is used for nuclear weapons. So that's weapons grade uranium. And low enriched uranium is for nuclear reactors. So low enriched is very low enriched. So low enrichment uranium stockpile also will be cut by 98% under this deal. It will eliminate its stockpile of medium enriched uranium. So it was undertaking uranium enrichment, that was true. So these are the provisions, restrictions put on Iran. It will reduce by about 2/3 the number of gas centrifuges for 13 years. Only enrich uranium up to 3.67% for the next 15 years. So low enriched is up to 5%. Low enrichment is used in nuclear reactors. So now this threshold has been put, not going beyond this for the next 15 years enrichment, and not to build any new heavy water facilities for the next 15 years. Also, uranium enrichment activities will be limited to a single facility using first generation centrifuges for 10 years. And other facilities will also be converted to avoid proliferation risk. Proliferation means spreading of the nuclear development knowledge to other countries, and so that they can also develop nuclear weapons. So these are the restrictions put on it. In return, what would Iran get? Iran would be allowed to have its trade. So all trade embargoes which have been put on it by USA, EU, United Nations Security Council. So these economic sanctions put on nuclear related aspects. So these will be uplifted. So there will be no embargo anymore. So in return for this, it has to fulfill all these criteria and also allow IAEA to regularly access all Iranian nuclear facilities. So this is Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, popularly known as Iran Nuclear Deal. So Donald Trump is talking of nullifying, ending this, quashing this deal, but then China completely defends and says no, this deal would continue. So this is put forth here too. You can see the sites, nuclear related facilities which were there in Iran too, which are there. So this is there. Then other things on which China and Iran cooperate is OBOR, One Belt, One Road connectivity. So this initiative we have already discussed, the Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Route, both. So this OBOR brings in connectivity. So this connectivity through laying down roads, railways and also through waterways. Iran is a partner, important partner for China in this. Also another thing is that Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of which China is an important member, Iran is also acquiring full membership here. So it's also an applicant for full membership. So Iran-China relations they are coming closer. It's what is seen. China is also establishing a rail link with Iran's neighbor Afghanistan. So Afghanistan, Iran, China all will be connected together through this rail link. So that's how India would also be affected because of this. So you can see the map here, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There are 6 members. Both India and Pakistan have also accepted and they have signed the Memorandum of Accession in June 2016. So they'll become full members of SCO2 in few months. So this is the progress. So these are the members, 6 members. It's Russia, China and the Central Asian nations, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. So all these are members. Plus the other thing is the Iran, Mongolia are 2 other nations which are bound to become full-time members of SCO2 soon. So presently they are observers, not full-time members. Then the next news item is Kofi Annan on peace mission in Myanmar. So Kofi Annan, who was the former Secretary General of United Nations too, he has been appointed as the chairman of Myanmar's Advisory Commission on Rakhine State. So this has been formed by the Aung San Suu Kyi government. She is the state councillor. She is not the president, as you know. She is having her sons who are foreign citizens, so she cannot become the leader in Myanmar, but she's appointed as the state councillor. So Aung San Suu Kyi along with Kofi Annan Foundation have formed this commission which will look into the issue of Rohingya Muslims in Rakhine state in Myanmar, where there are claims that they are being prosecuted. So this, even Malaysian Prime Minister recently had described the action in Rakhine as genocide. So genocide means mass killing of a particular clan, of a particular community. So this was the claim made. So presently Kofi Annan says that such huge claims or huge accusations should not be made, and there is a need for more transparency. So what is lacking in Myanmar is transparency, because journalists are not allowed to cover this story at all. There's a complete ban on them. So Kofi Annan has also assured that this ban will also be removed soon. So transparency will come in, and this will be a powerful tool to make sure that the truth comes out and rumors which are spread on the issue are eliminated. So of course there are grievances, because Rakhine, this is the place in state in Myanmar where the Rohingya Muslims live. These were de-recognized as citizens in 1982. So Myanmar earlier was under the Junta rule, the military leaders rule. So that time in 1982 they were de-recognized, and why? The reason is they look different from Myanmar. So they have this Bangladeshi look. So they are considered as Bangladeshi immigrants, but many of them have been living for decades or even a century in Myanmar. So they are called as Bangladeshi nationals, and they are being expelled out of Myanmar. So this is resulting in displacement of around 1 lakh Rohingyas already in 2012. So this is the huge crisis coming out, and Bangladesh also, you must have heard, had asked for Myanmar to peacefully resolve this matter. Otherwise Bangladesh is suffering because of the huge influx of these migrants, Rohingyas, who are majorly going to Bangladesh, which is a neighbor with Myanmar. Then the next news item is Pradhan moots Asian Buyers Forum to counter OPEC clout. So this is Minister of State for Petroleum and Natural Gas, Dharmendra Pradhan. He suggests that we should have an Asian LNG Buyers Forum to counter OPEC. What is OPEC? Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So all these countries who are major petroleum exporters have formed this grouping. So this is like a cartel. So cartel means all sellers come together. So they together decide the rate at which they will sell their commodity. So all these petroleum exporting countries have come together. They are the major ones. You can see the names here put forth. There are South American countries, African, and these Middle East countries. So they are a cartel. So once the rate is decided by them, how much amount will they produce of oil will they produce, bring it into the market. So that will be how the prices will also be determined. So they control all that, how much to produce, increase or reduce it, what should be the prices. So this is like a monopoly there. So cartelization. So as against this, the Minister of State of India is proposing that we should have an Asian LNG Buyers Forum. So the buyers also come together and decide at which rate they would buy. So this effect of OPEC can be reduced. But then experts are claiming that in LNG, the dominance is of the buyers itself. So buyers are already dominant. There was an attempt on this made by India and Japan too earlier, few years ago, but then this did not result in success, because natural gas occurs along with petroleum too, and natural gas occurs independently too, and there are new gas technologies also developed like shale gas and gas hydrates. So what are these also, we'll see. So that is also more important for us to understand this. So this is natural gas, how it is, its movement across the globe. So it comes to India, to Southeast Asia, Australia. The movement as such is shown. So these are the LNG points from where it is going. Markets are shown in this circular form, oval form, and the pipelines, how they are put forth, are shown. So liquefied natural gas is liquefied so that it can pass through pipelines. So this is how it is done. Natural gas is produced and then it is moved through ships to consuming countries. Then it is regasified. So this liquefied is regasified, passed through pipelines, and then it reaches the consumers as natural gas. because it is in the form of gas only, you don't get liquid. So anyway, so what are these gas hydrates and the shale gas, we'll see that too. So gas hydrates are solid ice-like form of water that contain gas molecules. So this is gas hydrates. So this gas generally is methane, and these methane gas hydrates are generally formed with water, of course. So that is at the sea floor, at water depths beneath 500 meters. So these gas hydrates can be used to extract gas and be used for energy generation. So this is gas hydrates. Then this is recent technology. So since oil prices have gone very high, so other means of achieving gas is found. So gas and petroleum products is found. So you can see how gas reservoirs can be there. These are also gas hydrates seen here. Then the next is shale gas. So what is this shale gas? Shale gas is natural gas that is found trapped within the shale formations. So shale is a form of sedimentary rock. So in these shale formations, you have gas within it. So shale gas is used increasingly in US presently. So this gas extraction technology has been developed. So of course this is not very concentrated. So that is the reason why it is much difficult. But then when gas prices go so high, then alternative technologies and alternate ways to bring in independence in this domain is very important. So that's what US has achieved. In 2000, shale gas was only 1% of US natural gas production, but in 2010 it went to 20%, and by 2035 it is expected to go to 46%. So then OPEC and other such cartels are affected because of this. So you can see natural gas is also found. This is conventional natural gas. Conventional natural gas may be found along with petroleum too, so oil and natural gas together too. This is coal bed methane, which is also used for generation of electricity energy, and this is the shale gas, you can see. So then the next is the shale gas found all over. So you can see USA, where are these basins in which there are estimates of this resource, shale gas resource. You can see here in India too, there are shale gas resources here. The darker regions show that they are there, and this shows that the basins are there, but there is no estimate of how much of the shale gas is present here. So that is shown in yellow. So shale gas you can see in India in detail too here, you can see. So it's in coastal Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Krishna Godavari Basin, Kaveri Basin, Cambay Basin in Gujarat, in Uttar Pradesh, Ganga Basin, Damodar Valley, and in Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. So Assam Arakan Basin. Here we have shale gas formations. But technology is a little costly, and gradually it is becoming cheaper and affordable too. The last news item is TIFR discovery challenges theory of superconductivity. So they have found bismuth semi-metal. It becomes a superconductor when temperature is lowered to 530 microkelvin. So that is minus 273 degrees Celsius. So this discovery contradicts the statements under the Bardeen-Cooper-Schrieffer theory. So this is a theory to explain superconductivity in materials. First of all, we have to understand what is this superconductivity. So when some materials go at very low temperature, so temperature it's cooled down significantly, the conductivity comes through reduction in resistance. So as resistance is there, as long as resistance is there, electron flow is affected, and that's why electric conductivity is low. So as resistance goes down, electric conductivity increases. So this for non-superconductors resistance is there, but for is there, and it reduces as temperature goes down. So this temperature is shown here. Temperature as it's going towards zero, resistance is decreasing. But with superconductors, what happens is when the temperatures go down, resistance at one temperature comes down to zero. So when resistance is almost nil, then it becomes a superconductor. So this is superconductivity. So these superconducting materials, at what temperature this will happen, all that is understood through this theory, but the results now which have come forth are contradicting it for bismuth, because bismuth, it was felt that this cannot achieve superconductivity because it has less number of electrons per atom too. So electron movement is the one through which electric conduction takes place, and at very low temperatures too it was seen that it was not undergoing superconductivities. But now they have reduced it to such an extent and proved that this is not understood through this BCS theory. So there is a need for new theory. Also earlier developments have also shown that this theory is not sufficient. So this is one proved by Indians as well now with bismuth. So this is the theory. You don't need to go in very much detail. If you're interested, you can. But then at least for our understanding, at least you should know what is superconductivity. So that is it for today. Thank you so much.